Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be.
Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 78, recorded on September 18th, 2020. It is the 35th recorded conversation with my friend Mike. We continued our discussion about solipsism and why we seemed to continue to be in disagreement. Increasingly, it has seemed that some of the disagreement is being produced by linguistic issues that still remain unclear. We also have some disagreement about the degree of importance in working on coming to agreement.
Okay, yes. So, last time, I think we were talking about, I remember, we had ended up that we actually found ourselves in agreement with a lot of our perspectives, but there were some differences, and I think that what I had said at the end of the last discussion was basically that the test for something outside of subjective experience, which is the fact that you can predict something and it can be wrong. The thing that I couldn't get past, this was, I think, directly exactly where we ended. The part of that I couldn't get past was the fact that that still happens inside of your subjective experience, and therefore is still subject to some of the interpretations and restrictions that solipsism or phenomenology would entail. And that's where I think a main difference that we still have exists.
I'm not sure that I'm not sure about this the specific difference of opinion. I think it would be good to try to define more precisely solipsism. And one thing that I noted in previous discussion was that you were saying it was kind of a matter of degree of probability. And I consider that to be on a different axis, and that solipsism is on the binary, is a binary situation between solipsism and not solipsism. And solipsism being the position that indeed the only thing that exists is your subjective experience. And
No, yeah, that's not how I understand solipsism, and I would even go as far as to say that's not the. Well, I lost the picture here. Okay, I would even go so far as to say that that's not even, I would say, kind of like the accepted definition
okay,
of it.
okay, and I haven't looked into that real thoroughly. So, what would you say was the accepted definition?
The accepted definition, and I'm actually, I think this is a good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to talk about what's accepted generally, a good place to go to would just be Wikipedia or a dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
And I could read that right here. So solipsism is a philosophical idea that only one's mind is sure to exist. Solipsism holds that knowledge of anything outside of one's own mind is unsure. The external world and other minds cannot be known and may not, the key word, may not exist outside the mind. So I think that, and it continues to go on, but I think the salient parts is this idea of being unsure.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
And so,
I understand, and I, I think I'm satisfied with that and agree with that.
mm-hmm. And the reason why we came to the conclusion last time that, well, at least I postulated last time, that everyone is solipsist to a degree, is because at some point, if you talk to people, we both had said that, well, you know, everybody will say to a certain degree that certain things are just a matter of subjective experience and kind of can't be known. And it's a matter of different people taking that to different extremes. So, you know, you might take it to, you know, one place. I certainly go a lot further than you do in claiming that certain things, that a good way of an analogy, I guess, would be using that metaphor of the curtain. I think more things are behind the curtain and cannot be known at all than maybe other people do. So I take that idea of solipsism to a further extent.
Well, I think that maybe the curtain metaphor is being changed a little bit because in the Mind-Body Problem book, it talks about as a metaphor, everybody, we're all sitting in the audience and there's a stage and a curtain, and behind the curtain is reality. And
you're right.
It's not an issue of knowing what's behind the curtain. It is that is impossible. All we can do is construct our models of reality and make them as accurate as possible, so that when we propose our models and say, well, is it like this or is it like that? Then we get back, well, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's even better. No, that's not so good. And the way in which that evaluation takes place is just the degree to which the model predicts what will happen next for the individual in the audience.
Right. And I would agree, actually, that was kind of not a very good analogous to that metaphor. I guess where I was going with that was, well, yeah, I agree that that wouldn't be a good extension to that metaphor. But the area, I think, where it does extend, and where you and I were having still differences and a sticking point, was exactly that statement of how to test and how can we get some idea. Let's just start here. How can we get some idea that something is even that the curtain even exists and there's something even behind the curtain? And you're maintaining that the way there's an easy way to do that, and that's the fact that we can predict and be wrong, or we can predict and be right.
That's what it means.
That's a means to an end. That's a means to.
No, that's all it means.
Right. That's all it means. Agreed. However, I take solipsism to a little bit of a further degree and say, but wait a minute, that the experience of the results of that test and the prediction itself is still happening within the subjective experience of a person. And that is very important to that's very integral to the implications of deciding if what we're really testing is what's behind the curtain, or if we're still just testing how our own phenomenology works. I don't think that says anything about the existence of something behind the curtain,
Well,
because
see,
it's still happening in your subjective experience.
you did say something, how our own phenomenology works is a very ambiguous, fuzzy sort of concept. I'm not sure what you mean by that. That is kind of stepping outside of the of my thinking when I think about these things.
Okay.
Our phenomenology, phenomenology is the study of such and such, or is the belief system that says such and such. But
I think it's used interchangeably, and I've used it kind of interchangeably. And I think it's used like a lot of things in philosophy. It's used a lot of different ways in a lot of different areas. But I think I think one of the things that phenomenology universally means is the study of it's the study of consciousness from exclusively from the first person point of view. So it is, when I say something is or explain something phenomenological, I say, well, that has to do with your phenomenology. What I'm saying is that it has to do with how you are experiencing what is happening, as opposed to what might be actually happening out there outside of your subjective experience. So when I say something is phenomenological, what I'm saying is that it only exists, or I'm trying to explain it only from a first person point of view of being in your own mind. So what I'm saying is I'm trying to explain it only from the perspective of thoughts, feelings, motivational states, sensations, things that the experience of I would also be phenomenological in nature. Only things that are happening inside your subjective experience. So that's traditionally, and I think universally, what would be meant, and it can be applied in different ways. But phenomenology, the key term and integral to that word is this idea of explaining something only from the first person, only from the subjective experience point of view.
Well, see, embedded in that is the idea that that there is a first person, that there, in other words, that it is as opposed to a third person point of view. In other words, it's implying that there's that choice there, and
right. But I would maintain that choice, or I would, well, a solipsist, I don't know if I would, but a strong solipsist would say that choice and the choice of the implication that there is a third person is not necessarily true, but it's rather just an artifact of language and logic. That simply because language and logic implies something else doesn't necessarily mean that that actually exists.
Yeah, and hidden in that is like language. Language implies community. but that's,
Mm.
I think we can erase that. I don't think that that's productive. Um,
Language implies community.
the
That's, I actually think that's incredibly important, what you just said.
Okay.
Language implies community. Language, when you just said that, it got me in a train of thought. You know, language is almost, it's almost antithetical to a solipsist point of view because of what you just said. I think that's incredibly poignant. The purpose of language and the whole point of language involves community
Mhm.
and relating to others. And when you're talking about something from a solipsist point of view or something phenomenological, of course, we have to use language, right? Because I'm talking to someone else. But when you try to use language to describe a phenomenological experience, when you try to use language to describe an experience phenomenologically, just that you made a great point. Just the fact that you're using language is kind of antithetical to the whole experience, that because the phenomenological experience is
Hypothetical
exclusively I.
experience. I didn't.
It is using language is inappropriate to describing, to using language. Let me say it this way: using language which was created and whose purpose is like you said, community oriented, which is kind of like the opposite of a soul experience. Trying to use language to describe a phenomenological experience is 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 destined to create uh, uh, at best a very inaccurate description of what that experience is, because you're forced to use terms that imply another. Because, like you said, language is community oriented.
But in solipsism, that implied other is still just within this subjective experience.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Now, so I think what you said was incredibly poignant. That was a brilliant insight. And I think that's very
and I'm
true.
not thinking so.
I thought it was.
Well, uh, but uh, but your reaction, I think, is equivalent to when I say that there is um, evidence by definition for reality in that you can make mistakes. It's of the same order, sort of same idea. I still have the feeling that that the the solipsism idea is not well defined. It's like well, you can be a little bit solipsistic or a lot solipsistic or something like that. But then, what does solipsism mean? And what you were saying was it was having to do with the degree of feeling of certainty uh, accompanying your beliefs about something.
I don't think so. I think that's an implication of that could be one implication and one result of a strongly solipsist position. But solipsism itself can be defined as, I think, in a practical layman's terms, not being sure, the key
There you
word being
are.
sure, not being certain that anything of the thing that things exist outside your subjective experience, not being certain of it.
Yeah, right. But the feeling of certainty about a belief is like on one axis, and what the belief is on another axis. And the
Okay.
so one can there could be some kind of some kind of uh, topic or subject that was binary, where you either whether it could only be A or not A, and then you can say, well, whichever position you take, you can feel certain or uncertain about that, or have a certain degree of certainty about it. So uh, that's a different, as I say, on a different axis. Um, so
And I think you can use that same axis to describe um,
which one?
solipsism. Well, I think what you're doing when you create an axis, you're creating a relationship between two variables, right? So you're creating
No,
a
no,
relationship.
no, no. I think this is something went wrong here.
Okay,
No,
I
I'm
misunderstood
saying
then.
that there is the the belief that all that exists is just your subjective experience.
No.
Wait, let me finish.
Oh, okay.
There's the belief that all that exists is just your subjective experience, or the belief that that is not so. That is a binary situation. Then there is the question of how confident are you in your belief about whichever position you take. And so that's why I say that's on a different axis, you know. Um, uh,
Well, I
so
think
there's
it's I think it's
binary
yeah.
axis, and then there's the issue of the degree of confidence.
Right. Okay. So let me describe it. I think I see what you're saying. Let me try to describe what I was saying a different way rather than say. Um, let me explain it. And I think you are really creating a relationship, and that relationship's important between the two variables. But first, let's start here. The idea that there is a binary choice for a belief is happening within your subjective experience. And there is nothing outside of our own minds that puts that limitation on a belief or a choice. So from a more strongly solipsist position, I would argue that what's happening is the person's already has made some kind of decision in their subjective experience that they might not be aware of. Which I think if you talk to them about it, they would be that there is in fact only a binary choice, A or B. So because I could see there's actually a third choice. The third choice is A and B both imply some kind of external reality outside my subjective experience. That's not necessarily true. So there's a third option. The third option is both are wrong. Both A and B are both wrong, and I don't want to believe in either of them. That I'm not sure what's going on outside there, so I can't
Well,
declare either A or B is correct.
when you say I'm not sure, I think you're saying, therefore, I don't want uh, to state that I have a belief one way or the other.
No, it's that I don't know, therefore I cannot know that I don't. Yeah, it's I don't have. I don't believe I don't believe in either of those choices.
Well,
I think
what
it would
do
be
you
a
mean
good way of
believe
saying
in
it.
the choices? What do you mean believe in the
I
choice?
don't believe that either choice A or choice B. I don't believe in choice A or choice B. I don't believe that something exists outside of my mind. I don't believe something that non exists outside of my mind. I don't know. It'd be kind of like saying it's kind of like the difference
Not
between a
knowing,
theist and an atheist.
but not knowing is again something different. Uh, there's a problem, and then whether one knows the answer to it or not. Those are two
Right.
separate things.
Right, which is it's exactly the point of solipsism. If you recall, when you started talking about this, I raised my finger and I said, "Well, wait a minute. You know, solipsism is not a belief that things exist outside of your mind or they don't. Solipsism is the fact that you're unsure about it. You can't be certain. So even the fact that you're those two choices in and of themselves are not solipsistic at all, because both of those choices, A or B, imply that you can actually know what's outside your subjective experience. And a solipsist position would say you can't. Therefore, those two choices are almost like a non sequitur. They don't even make sense. The only thing you can say is you can say something like this. Which choice do you think is more probable? A, there's something exists outside your mind, or B, something doesn't exist. Things don't exist outside your mind. And that would be purely solipsist. It's grading something on an uncertainty scale. Everything is uncertain, but it's a matter of what degree of uncertainty you put on it. Again, because solipsism has to do with doubt and uncertainty. You can't be certain that things exist outside your subjective experience.
Well, um, I really don't. I don't have a good response. I don't. I'm not saying that what you're saying makes perfect sense to me, and uh, but the there are there's the question. I think always there's the question of what is the value of such and such, or what is the reason for believing so and so, or what are the reasons, and so on. And to me, again, I go back to my previous understanding of solipsism was that it was the idea that all that exists was just your own, quote, subjective experience. Subjective, of course, implies that there's something else, which is a problem as far as discussing it and so on. It goes back to the question that I asked and your answer to at 10 o'clock this morning, when you were not thinking about me, did I exist? And and of course, you can always say, well, I can't be sure.
No,
But
I wouldn't even say that. I wouldn't even say you can't be sure. I would go even further than that.
how would you go further?
Well, firstly, I would say that the situation that you are proposing relies on an idea that you can't be sure about. And that idea is that there is some, again, I want to emphasize what I'm about to say because it's going to sound crazy. But I want to emphasize, again, I'm talking from a solipsist point of view that says you can't be sure. I'm talking about sure, like certain. So it relies on the idea that you have some, that you have, I'm not going to, I want to use the word ontologically. You want that, it relies on the idea that you have some absolute form of existence for me that's outside my own experience of you. And that's you just don't know that for sure. So I would say almost that's a trick question. But if I was to therefore to go ahead and answer it from a solipsist point of view, because you don't have any because it can't be known for certain that you have any existence outside my experience of you, for me, I would say absolutely. When I don't think of you, for me, you don't exist. You only exist when you're active in my phenomenology.
But see, that's that again goes, and it's the postmodern little trick, I would say, or corruption of the concept of reality. And we have talked about that in the past, that when we gave up pursuing, quote, absolute truth, then pragmatism arose, and it was based upon, well, if it works, that's all that counts. And so if it works, that essentially means to that extent it's true. And so people said, yeah, that's right. So if it works for me, it's true for me. If it works for you, it's true for you. It may not be true for you. So then the whole concept of truth or reality got washed aside. And that was great because people could more easily avoid what they naturally tended to do, and that was to engage in hostile interaction when there was difference of opinion.
Let me give you an alternate narrative.
Okay.
So several hundred years ago, people looked outside and they said, you know, everything looks flat. And all the maps we draw and all of our theories about the world and everything would revolve around the idea that the earth is flat. And the world was flat. And everybody accepted, well, but wait. Everybody accepted that idea that the world is flat.
Okay.
In a very, very similar way. Let me go on, let me extend that analogy to a certain degree. And then somebody came along and said, wait a minute, look at this. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? The earth isn't flat. The world is round. And in fact, you know, the sun is at the center of the universe. And people are like, what the hell are you talking about? That's not the way it is. That's not the way people talk. That's not the terminology they use. You're wrong. That's ridiculous. So when you say that postmoderns and the solipsism is postmodern and it's this, that's the other thing, for me, that's analogies of people 700 years ago saying, when somebody claims the earth is really round, when people kind of say, oh, you're full of shit and that's nonsense and that's a corruption of these ideas that the world is flat, that's what you're doing. You're to everybody in this, just like the world is flat, to everybody, I imagine, and certainly including myself, it seems like something exists outside my mind, outside my subjective experience. But just like, I forgot the astronomer who who came up with the idea that the world is actually round. But in any case, just like that guy, there are philosophers who said, well, wait a minute, let's think about this. Let's do some thought experiments. Let's make some arguments here. And in fact, you can't be sure that something exists outside your mind. And so it actually, when you kind of say that postmodernists have corrupted this idea of reality, no. It's just the opposite. You're holding on to an idea of reality that is anachronistic to more modern current ideas, which are very, very strong in argument about the way you and I and everybody on the planet, how their consciousness actually works. So I don't think it's a corruption at all. I think you experience that as a corruption because you are wedded to an anachronistic idea. And in fact, the idea of solipsism wasn't even created by postmodernists. Postmodernism was maybe a philosophical or a political movement that capitalized an idea that was coined by Husserl and goes back to Descartes. I mean, these things go back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's not postmodern at all. That's completely, I don't think, true. That's really untrue.
Well, that's not the term postmodernism had to be developed when modernism was being used, and
Right.
modernism. It also, in going way back in our discussions, you readily embraced postmodernism.
Sure.
Yeah, and
I think I embrace postmodernism if the way you're defining it, you often define postmodernism as almost exclusively with the idea that truth is relative. And yeah, I mean, if you're defining postmodernism in that way, that's very, very, very much aligns with, with my attitudes and my ideas about things.
I see. Yeah, well, it certainly is not mine. The problem is, well, I don't know the best way to try to outline the problem other than to say that what is highly important to us, to every one of us, to some degree, is accuracy of belief. Talked about existential beliefs about the world and what exists and how it works and so on. Because everything we do is based upon a belief as to what will happen if we do it.
Yep.
And when things don't happen as predicted, then we say we made a mistake. And we know that the more mistakes we make, the more pain, suffering, disability, and early death we have.
Which, by the way, you asked me, what is the utility of solipsism? And that's my personal reason for believing in it. What you just said.
I know.
It's more accurate. The more accurate you are with the way things work, the way the universe is, the way reality is, the less you're going to suffer. And I think solipsism represents a more accurate theory of that than any other I've ever seen.
Well, I don't. Well, that's interesting because that certainly is not the way that I see it.
I know. You know what point I'd like to bring up here? It's something that's happened this week especially.
Okay.
And if anybody's even listening out there, hopefully. I think what's even more important than what we're talking about is the importance of people to understand that thinking about things matter. It's just shocking to me, Bill, how nobody I've ever met, except you and me, have given practically any thought to trying to get their ideas and beliefs accurate, and questioning their ideas, and trying to learn more and to question things. It's just it it is it's just a giant mystery to me how people cannot think that the things that we're talking about now are of the utmost importance to the quality of their life. Do you have a similar experience as I do with regards to that? That people just, most people, and I would go so far as to say everybody I've ever met except you, seems to have the idea that what we're talking about has little to no relevance in their lives. I can't get my head around that. Do you have a similar experience?
Well, have different reactions. I think that I see people who are very interested in developing as accurate beliefs as possible, and but on the other hand, discussions like we are having, notice, can go on for hour after hour, and one can ask the question, well, what is accomplished? What is being accomplished by that in terms of anything that is measurable in one's life, like the amount of money or the degree of health or the amount of enjoyment that one obtains from interacting with others or watching ball games or whatever. But on the other hand, I know that that many people, of course, that their lives are directed in non-quote intellectual directions, and they would regard it, discussions like we're having as playing with words and so on, and that the important thing is
exactly
what to get at Harris Teeter today, and so on. So,
yeah.
But I do agree with you that at least this is, I'm assuming that you also agree with this, that that one of the most important things we can do is work on coming to agreement with each other, not just because being in agreement is everything that is needed, because if you agree to stuff that's not accurate, then that is a bigger problem than maybe some degree of disagreement. But but what people very frequently say is, well, you and I just have different opinions about it. What's true for you may not be true for me, and so let's just go have a beer, is what I usually say. Mm-hmm. It is a way, I think it is unusually difficult for people to accept the idea that if it's something that makes a difference with regard to the amount of pain, suffering, disability, and early death, or quality of life, or something like that, that if there's difference of opinion, then it's important to keep studying, keep working on that difference of opinion to see what is correct. In other words, to work toward increasing accuracy of belief. And I think that people do not accept that idea very much, because they look around and see that, well, that's not really done. And of course, that has to do with, I believe that we are just in some ways barely above chimpanzees. And we could be vastly better than we are currently as a species. The amount of pain, suffering, disability, and early death that we experience by virtue of what we do to ourselves and each other and the planet is enormous. And if we came to the point where we stopped doing those things, where we really did those things that that were optimal always, well, our lives would be drastically different. And but people generally say, well, no, this is just the way things are, and they give the evidence for that. It's the way they've always been. Yes, that's correct. But I think we are making some change where we are, I think, in-depth discussions is something that is taking off a little bit, that is being done more. Now, it's been done in the time of Socrates. There was some discussion and so on, but as far as it being a generally something that is generally felt to be very, very important in our lives, I don't think that is the way it is currently.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is that the difference is that people have resistance to talking about things such as these that we're talking about, that things that may challenge their ideas about things. From my experience, it's way beyond that. There's not even an understanding that these ideas matter in their lives, that these ideas inform the way that they live. I mean, whether they know it or not. And I just can't, it's making it like difficult to relate to people. And I have a kind of an issue with my supervisor, my clinical supervisor, where I wouldn't say it's not a difficulty, but it's just like I feel that he is stuck in a certain philosophical and psychological point of view, and that he doesn't really understand. He doesn't even forget about even talking about it. There's not, and this is true. This is true in groups of people we know, and the philosophical groups we've been part of. It's like when we talk about solipsism versus empiricism and the things we're talking about, it's like people would say, oh, that's interesting intellectual fodder. Mm-hmm. Who cares? What does that have to do with my life? And, from my point of view, it has everything to do with your life and the quality of your life. If you believe in a solipsist point of view versus an empiricist point of view, you are going to live so differently and feel so differently about things. I just can't get my head around why people don't even think it's important.
That's not clear to me.
How so?
Well, it just is not. It's hard for me. In the first place, again, it's like in my mind, solipsism is a binary position. It's a theory. It's that the only thing that exists is such and such. You are making use of the other issue about the feeling of certainty about one's beliefs, and and I believe that is important to. I guess people refer to it as being a skeptic. In other words, being um, ready to question one's own beliefs and to have one's own beliefs questioned. Um, that's a separate issue, and I don't think that it in any way is dependent upon the solipsism versus not solipsism dichotomy that uh, that yes, I understand your ability to question and to be unsure about things and so forth. Yes, I think that is valuable, and I agree with that. I think that we are pretty much united, in that area.
Whether or not it's, I was just using it as an example, empiricism versus solipsism or whatever, but anything, the ideas to which you live your life and the ideas that guide how you feel about things, how you behave, are really, really important for you to think about. And people don't seem to think about them. But don't even, that's what I'm talking about more so than, this is just an example I said about solipsism versus empiricism. Any idea. It's like they're taken for granted. They're not thought about. They're not, thinking about them is not considered to be important. Maybe it's just like what you said. They're taken for granted and just not questioned ever. And it's just really, it's becoming more difficult to relate to people like that. I just have a harder time.
I think that there is a general movement, though, in the direction of
Really?
debate and so forth. Yeah, that there are online debates, Braver Angels, uh, where they.
Never heard of that. What is that?
It is a series of online debates that allow for participation of the people who join the Zoom meetings, where they take an issue that is usually kind of hot or whatever, and they discuss it in a way that really interferes with the development of anger and pejorative speech and stuff like that. It's there's a lot of ritual, like one person speaks, and then if another person wants to, challenge or question, they have to say, Madam Chairman, I would like to address the speaker with the following question, or I would like to have the speaker answer the following question. So it always goes through the one of the leaders of the debate. And so my impression is that it's relatively slow moving, and but what people report is that they actually get to see the other side in more detail, and they end up not being as dichotomous as they were originally, the two sides of the debate. The two different sides understand each other better. So I think, and I think, that we are having more in the way of public debates. Now, I think that actually it would be important for us to do quite a bit more along those lines, and to have that built into our decision-making function within our society and so forth. But but I think we are headed in that direction. I think that people are recognizing some value in it.
Well, that's good to know. I'm going to check out that site about that. I was just an aside that when we talked about the the importance of these ideas, I just think no matter what your ideas are, it's important for you to explore and consider them and think about them and consider other ideas, that the idea, the ideas power almost everything about your life. They power your behavior, what you do, your motivational states, how you feel about things. And it's really important to look at them. And I think, these two ideas, for me, really influence how I behave and how I feel about things, which is what, one of the reasons why I like to talk about them so much. But anyway, it's just an aside. So going back to what you were saying, it still sounds like, you're holding on to the idea of solipsism being more of a black and white idea, that about whether things exist outside your mind or not, outside your subjective experience or not. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well,
That's
just
what you're holding on to.
yes. In other words, that's the question, and then there's the issue of how certain can you be of one side or the other.
Yeah, that would be a whole different position. That's not solipsism as I understand it. Yeah, the idea of
I'm a little bit uncertain, or a little bit lacking in confidence that that's the original meaning of the word.
well, that definitely is I mean, I could read it again from Wiki. If you want to know, and I'd say that's the original meaning. I could make some kind of reference, some claims about that, but I could certainly say that is absolutely the popular notion of the word.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I understand that there's the popular notion. In other words,
How it's used. That's
yeah,
how it's used in philosophical. If I was to take a course on solipsism in college, the course wouldn't be about trying to prove or disprove whether reality actually existed outside your subjective experience. It would be the study and talk about how you can't be sure of it being either way. You just don't know. May not, and they would be focusing the idea of doubt. So I think your point, it is a skeptical position. I would think solipsism is under the umbrella of skepticism, I would say.
yeah, well, yeah, so I can't get beyond the idea of solipsism being a position that one can take, presumably, but then there's the question as to whether one would be confident in taking that position, and that it's not a very tenable position as I see it.
How
And
so? And what do you mean by tenable? It's
because,
displeasurable?
no, because I believe that that we would be at a loss. Let's see, how would I say it? There is one, as I keep saying, there's one phenomenon that that we are faced with, and that is we make mistakes. We predict inaccurately, but we also predict accurately, and for the most part, do predict accurately. And so that means that what we are that we can tell the difference to some extent between what is true and what is not, what is real and what is not real. We also, of course, have the problem of skepticism, like whether I exist or not. You could right now just be in the middle of a dream and it seemed like you've known me for a long time and so on. And I might not exist at all for you. You can't be certain that that's not true. But on the other hand, the way that we live our lives, one of the most important and central issues is our ability to predict, our ability to predict what will happen or what will happen if we do this versus that, and the concern about making mistakes and so on. It's like, I think, an extremely central thing. Everything that you do moment by moment is based upon your prediction as to what will happen if you do it.
Right, and that is why things seem so absolutely real outside the thing, outside your subjective experience. But everything you just said was that philosophers, and I promise you, I'm going to look them up and find out who said it. But there was a philosopher a couple of 100 years ago that argued exactly what you just said, and basically rejected solipsism on that ground. He basically rejected he basically said solipsism, the idea of solipsism is so opposite to the way we have to live our lives and the way we experience our lives that to even consider it is an interesting mental exercise, but has absolutely no material practical benefit to life,
Yeah,
and therefore shouldn't even be considered.
Yeah, and that, so it sounds like he and I are in agreement.
Yeah, it reminded me of it.
You use the phrase "seems real," and that is a problematic term. Trying to be precise about.
Yeah, I wasn't being precise when I said "seems real."
Mhm.
Yeah,
Look, there are different ways that we use our words. I mean, that's characteristic of our language, our non-technical language.
Right.
And so.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, for me, solipsism is the most convincing and the most accurate philosophical system I've ever studied. And it provides answers to more, it provides an explanation for more things than any other philosophical system I've studied.
An explanation?
Yeah, an explanation for human behavior, an explanation for let me just restrict it to that. An explanation of human behavior.
Doesn't do that at all for me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it definitely does. It explains, I think, a lot of human history, human behavior. I think, some areas where it's more shaky is and I think it still has a foundation and it still provides explanations, but it's a little bit more shaky. Is talking about things like mathematics, science, going to the moon, those kinds of things. It makes it much more difficult to it. Well, it makes it more difficult, but not that much more difficult to argue that what these mathematical equations are experiencing is something actually outside of subjective experience about the way things work. Solipsism breaks down a little bit, but not entirely in those realms.
Sometimes you use wording. I don't want to interrupt.
Oh, sorry. Go like this, and then I'll stop. What word did I use?
I know, but I worry that it could be considered to be nitpicking or actually be nitpicking. You said something about mathematical equations. There was some way of using words there that I couldn't follow, but
well, what I meant by that was the idea of mathematical ideas, and this is a debate I think has been going on within mathematics for a while. Is does the mathematics have any have any existence outside of it? The way they usually say it is this: was mathematics invented or discovered? One camp holds that mathematics is a discovery, that we discovered relationships that are actually happening in reality outside of our subjective experience, and it represents something that actually exists independent of humanity. Another camp says no. Mathematics wasn't discovered, it was invented. It's a tool that the mind uses to try to predict relationships and the way things are happening in the world outside of subjective
Right.
experience.
Yeah,
One is more solipsist than the other.
I understand that, but I think there are linguistic um, imperfections in that kind of debate or set of issues. It depends a lot on what one means by mathematics. And remember, talking about whether mathematics, in quotes, exists independent of us or not, um, the term exist has all sorts of different meanings.
Right.
Uh,
So yeah, the way I would describe it, and the way I've heard it described is: fast forward 5 million years into the future when humanity is extinct. Does the number 3 still exist?
uh,
So if you maintain that mathematics is a discovery, then yes, the number 3 still exists. If you maintain that mathematics was an invention, then the number 3 doesn't exist.
it depends on what is meant by, quote, the number 3. Certainly, if we're talking
A collection of individual entities whose total is 3. I mean, I would argue it's a discovery. It's a invention. It's an artificial grouping of 3 individual entities, such that you call it 3. The other camp says, "Are you insane?" And they cite more advanced mathematics to show how, like, for example, the mathematics, orbital mechanics. Okay, they say, well, the equations of orbital mechanics are not an invention. They're a discovery, because 5 million years from now, when humanity's dead, the Earth is still going to orbit around the sun. Therefore, those equations are a discovery, not an invention. It's still Earth is still going to be going around the sun. I don't agree with that. I'm in the other camp, and
I think it's a linguistic problem, because we bring things into what we call existence just by the act of definition. We put a boundary around something and call what's in that boundary something. We give it a label and thus bring it into existence. But as far as whether the universe operates according to laws or principles that allow one to understand how that works and therefore be able to predict, that's a different issue. So it all depends upon, I think, again, that a lot of these things are linguistic problems. Well, I'm trying to think whether what you and I optimally should do about our apparent difference of opinion with regard to solipsism. I'm not satisfied that we have really identified the reasons that we have been disagreeing. At least I don't think that we consider those reasons to be the same. And
I think it's pretty. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I think that you and I both understand that our beliefs about anything can be questioned. In other words, we can have a lot of confidence or some confidence or very little confidence in particular beliefs, but that beliefs can indeed be accurate or inaccurate. When they are inaccurate, then they lead to mistakes and so forth. And I think that we agree with that, but I think we have different ways of conceptualizing that. I don't. I think that also that you've read my book on the mind-body problem, and it has certain ideas in it that have to do with what we're talking about, and including the metaphor of the behind the curtain, trying to come up with models that are increasingly accurate, meaning that they lead to successful prediction and so forth. But we tend to look at that metaphor a little bit differently, and so that it's kind of tricky. The whole I think it is interesting that that with so much discussion, we do not seem to be able to say, well, we agree with each other completely, and yet
Why is that?
Why is that?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think you're going to say it. And that. Well, I'm just wondering why do you think that's interesting or unusual, or it seems like that there's some, it didn't meet your expectation that we would come to agreement. I'm wondering why you think we would have come to agreement.
Well, I guess that is kind of an important issue. Most people regard the coming to agreement as being something rather rare, and that basically you just get along with people even though you have difference of opinion, and find ways not to give each other a hard time and so forth. The idea of people, at least about certain issues, having pretty strong beliefs about something and then ultimately coming to agreement, that seems to be an unusual phenomenon, and we were talking about that a little bit earlier. Well, but I think your position, as I understand it, postmodern, is, well, why worry about it? Why worry about that we don't agree? And or why in the world would you think we would come to agreement? We have different ways of looking.
No. Yeah, that's not what I meant.
Okay.
There seems to be, well, I guess maybe that is what I meant. And let me make it ask it in more succinct terms. There seems to be almost like there seems like that you have a belief that if you and I talk about something long enough, we will come to agreement. And I'm wondering why you have that belief.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure that I exactly have that belief, but I do have the belief that that is uh, a good goal to have, a good working um, goal, and but I know that it is very difficult for brains to change, and that um, uh, like each of us has had a different history of the development of our ideas and our use of words, our different meanings for words, our definitions, and so on. And to just switch from one belief system to another is very difficult. I think, though it does occur, people do uh, come to agreement when they've been in disagreement. Um, but it is a difficult process. Now, I also consider that it's an important process. And um, but let's see, your original question was
I
why?
think I think yeah, I don't think you answered it. The original question is, why do you have the belief that if two people work hard enough, long enough, they will come to agreement? It seems you have that belief.
No, I don't have that belief. I believe that the chances, the odds of coming to agreement increase with time. But uh, and I think that it is an important goal to have. But as far as oh yeah, if you discuss it enough, you'll come to agreement. I think there are so many different factors that could be something that um, in the course of actually doing it with all the restrictions on time, and so forth, that it's not something that can be guaranteed to happen. So I know I don't have the belief that it will occur, but
Okay.
I think it's important that the difficulty in arriving at agreement, and that difficulty, should be understood as clearly as possible.
Okay. Yeah. What I was zoning in on is when you had said that, you were surprised that I think your words were,
Mhm.
you were surprised that, we've been talking about this for so long, and I'm surprised that we still haven't come to agreement. So
Mhm.
I heard that there's an implication that you thought that you and I would be able to come to an agreement, a belief in that. I'm going to ask you another question. Could it be possible? See, implicit with the belief that if two people work long enough, there's a higher probability, or that they will eventually come. Let's predict there's an infinite amount of time that they will eventually come to an agreement. That kind of, in my opinion, presupposes this idea. It presupposes a belief, as we talked about before, that there is some absolute truth, some idealistic truth that you can be accurate or inaccurate against. So I propose the reason why we have not been able to come to an agreement is because, in fact, that idea, the belief in that ideal is inaccurate. That this is an example where there is no ideal truth out there. This is an example of solipsism. There is absolutely nothing behind the curtain when it comes to what we're talking about that we can be sure about. There's your belief, there's my beliefs. They are independent unto themselves. They cannot be measured against anything external to what's happening inside our subjective experience. Therefore, it is simply not possible for us to judge our beliefs against some idealistic truth that's outside our subjective experience. There's almost, whether or not we agree is simply a function of our willingness to say that we agree. There's no test. And that's why we can't come to agreement.
But I think there is. I think we have developed rules of logic and also rules of evidence. And that's why we are able to do such amazingly miraculous things that we've never been able to do before.
There's no, but I grant that. I'll grant that with going to the moon and things like that. I'm talking about. I'm speaking specifically about what we're talking about here during these discussions, and our inability to come to an agreement. I would argue we can't come to an agreement because there's nothing to come to an agreement to. There is no truth outside your subjective experience and my subjective experience that we can measure our beliefs against in this matter.
I think there is.
Yeah, see, that's.
But it depends a little on what we're talking about. Depends on whether we're making statements about quote reality or not, because we can show that the evidence is for or against what we're saying. But that doesn't mean that, don't confuse that with having proven that such and such is so beyond any doubt, like absolute truth and so on. No, we're always we're always, working on our models of reality, not on reality itself, and making our models more and more accurate. And,
so that is why I would call you a solipsist.
in no way does that connect in my mind with solipsism.
It's solipsist in the sense that, let me put it in an analogy, that you will always be well, maybe I'm stretching that a little bit. But what is solipsistic in what you're saying is the idea that no matter what point you're at on the continuum towards getting closer to absolute truth, you'll never get there. Therefore, you can never be sure that what you believe in is the absolute truth. That's solipsistic in nature. You can't be sure of anything other than what's in your subjective experience.
We can't be sure of that.
No. Well, I guess it depends what you mean by subjective experience. This has to do with a priori and posteriori, and subjects and object and differentiation. And
now we're getting into
if something is subjective experience, I don't fully agree with this, but for the most part, subjective experience could be considered a priori. It doesn't. You don't require. Again, I'm not speaking exactly from my belief system. I'm kind of simplifying it, but
we're using an obscure term now.
There is no. I mean, it's because that's the term. I mean, it's obscure because most people don't think about it.
What does it mean?
A priori means that you can know it without experience. Simplifying it, that's what it means.
Okay, the problem there is the word know, K-N-O-W. See.
I could get into a little bit more detail that you can. See, I don't know. That's the nature of a priori is outside of language. So it's going to take me a little while to think of either analogy or something to describe it. So you're having trouble with the word known. Let me try the use. At least if I can use the word experience. No, it's. No, I'm going to try to use, instead what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to define what known means more succinctly. A priori is knowledge of something that is gained without experience. Maybe that would be a good way of maybe really simplifying it. So let me give you some examples.
Well, a tree could have knowledge.
No, so let me give you some. I don't know. That's outside the scope of. That's a whole nother conversation. So, for example, I don't fully. The Heidegger's. Well, now let me try not to use philosophical things. So, consciousness is a priori. I can't experience my consciousness, yet it is known to exist. I can say I'm conscious. I say I'm conscious without experiencing my consciousness.
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. That's consciousness has never been observed.
That's a priori. That's the point.
And
so you can know consciousness without experience it. I know I'm conscious even though I can't experience it.
You're saying you can believe anything. You can.
No, there's a certain things that are posteriori, and that's the opposite of a priori. So let me, a more common example, feelings might be considered a priori. Not really, but that might be an easier example for somebody to understand. Something that's posteriori. Let me provide a reference point for something that's opposite. Something that's posteriori is something that you could really that requires experience to understand, to gain knowledge of it.
I
Something
think
that
they're very ambiguous here. I think
not ambiguous. These are common philosophical terms that you may not be familiar with, but they're not ambiguous.
Well, I am familiar with them, but I cannot rattle off a good definition at the moment. But a priori is, I think, primarily is referring to that which is assumed. And
that's another way of
priori is based on that which is deduced.
That's another way people talk about a priori. So consciousness, you can't deduce that you're conscious. It's assumed. It doesn't require experience to deduce that I am conscious. It simply is. It is a given. It is axiomatic. It is something that you do not require experience to gain knowledge of it. I can't experience my consciousness. It just is. Posteriori things are things that you gain knowledge about through deduction or experience.
Well,
those are the two.
Well, the thing is, consciousness implied in your use of the term consciousness is that it is a container of all of your subjective experience. And
no, I would argue something that's a priori has no container. You have no reference point.
Reference point, I don't know what that means.
There is, because you can't experience your consciousness, it exists in its entirety. You cannot step outside your consciousness to experience it, to see it in a container. Your consciousness is in essence unknowable as an object. As a subject object, you can't know your consciousness. It's simply outside our ability to
And
experience.
it's not a priori knowledge.
No, no, no. It's the exact opposite. That means that it is a priori knowledge.
Well,
If it was
you
posteriori knowledge, we would be able to
you,
step outside our consciousness, see it, experience it, judge it, deduce things about it, but we can't do that.
kind of lost it now. You were equating not knowing something with it being a priori, but I was not able to.
Not knowing something. Oh yeah, the idea of consciousness being in a container, being a container for something. No, that's not.
We talk about outside of consciousness.
Talking about something outside of consciousness has no meaning. Certainly not in, you could talk about it, you could use the word poetically to mean certain things. But if we're talking about consciousness, technically the way we're talking about it as it relates to solipsism, no, to say something outside of consciousness is it's almost oxymoronic. I mean, consciousness constitutes everything. There is nothing outside of consciousness. It is a priori.
So
It is known. You cannot know consciousness.
The back seat of your car does not exist.
The back seat of my that's a solipsist position. The back seat of my car doesn't exist unless I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
But I don't think that is that. But wait a minute, that has nothing to do with the nature of consciousness and that it being a priori. That's a straw man argument. That's nothing to do at all with what I'm saying. The fact that consciousness cannot be observed directly, and nothing, you can't deduce anything about it, has nothing to do with the back seat existing or not existing when I'm not thinking about it. Totally different. Totally different. That one has nothing to do with the other. So, but anyway, when you're, this was really posteriori and a priori was really relevant to a statement you had said earlier, which is why I even brought it up. But fortunately, I don't remember what you had said. Do you remember?
No.
You had said that. Damn it! It was so important too. Well, anyway, the way the ideas of a priori and posteriori, which if you want to dumb these ideas down a little bit and simplify them, can be explained. One level of dumbing down is things you can experience objectively and things you can't. Dumbing it down further would be, and simplifying it further would be, things you can assume without experiencing them to be true, and things you can't assume that exist without experiencing them. The things that you can assume to exist without experiencing them are those things would be considered a priori. And the salient aspect of that.
An example being what?
The only thing that I believe exists a priori is consciousness. Even your thoughts, even your feelings, even your motivational states is something that I would describe as I experience. I experience thoughts, I experience feelings, I experience motivational states, I experience sensations. Therefore, I think other people would disagree. Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." He believed that thoughts are a priori. You cannot experience your thoughts. You are your thoughts. Okay, so I disagree with that. I think future philosophers had came up with other ideas that are more akin to the idea of consciousness, and that is truly a priori. It's consciousness that experiences thoughts and feelings and motivational states, and that is a priori. That is very, very important.
Consciousness experiences something. It's an agent.
that's the best explanation of it. Yes, it's in that using language that it's an agent.
Yeah, and so
And maybe that's one way to kind of it gets some kind of way of experiencing consciousness is by thinking of it that way. It is that thing which experiences thoughts, feelings, and motivational
I think
states.
we're going off the deep end into a lot of ambiguity. It's now
All right, Zeus.
when we're talking about agency, that's like free will versus determinism.
Well, I wouldn't say it's free will versus determinism. I'm talking about things phenomenologically, how I experience from a first person point of view my thoughts and my feelings and my sensations.
Well, you haven't defined I yet.
Well, that's the point. I is a priori. It can't be, you cannot define I directly in any other way other than using something that it experiences. It's very similar to the idea of the universe or the multiverse. It's something that you cannot step out of to experience it. You are always in it.
Priori.
So, right. So that would be an example of something that's a priori.
The multiverse.
It's not necessarily it's not a priori in the sense it can be. It's not epistemologically. No, it's in the nature of how the multiverse of the universe was thought up. I would argue that's not a priori, but it's kind of like a priori in the sense that you cannot directly observe the universe. You cannot step outside the universe and see it.
Kind of a priori.
Right. It's kind of it's a priori in the it's not a priori epistemologically in the sense that the idea of the universe was clearly deduced. It was not, we weren't born kind of knowing the universe existed. So clearly it's posteriori knowledge. This is something we deduced. We can't assume it. It was knowledge that we gained. However, what's similar in nature between something that's truly a priori like a consciousness and something like the idea of the universe or even the idea of infinity is that you cannot step outside of these things and view it. You cannot step outside the universe and see it. You cannot step outside your consciousness and see it. Those are similar characteristics of, even though one's a priori and one's not, but those are both similar characteristics of both ideas.
Not. What I didn't get which one is and which one.
The universe is not a priori knowledge. The consciousness is.
Okay. So we're still and we're using the word knowledge, which has a whole lot of difficulty with it, associated with it.
Can I relate this? You want me to relate this back to solipsism?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay, so.
Well, wait a minute. Relate what back to solipsism?
The ideas of a priori and posteriori, and how that kind of power.
Let's stop for a minute.
Okay.
A priori and a posteriori. I
gotta find how to pronounce that.
I think are terms that just mean that which one assumes versus that which one has arrived at a conclusion about. And but one can assume something and then later say, well, I've decided not to assume it. Maybe I could question it. But that's, I think, the basic meaning of it.
No. Yeah, and I look, I agree. I mean, you a priori especially is a complicated, difficult thing to get your head around, and I'm probably not even doing it perfectly. But I think that the way that you're, when I was a little arrogant when I said that, I know I'm not doing it perfectly. But I definitely would say that the way to characterize a priori knowledge as exclusively as simply an assumption, or posteriori knowledge as simply as something that is deduced, that's true. It's a characteristic of it, but it is a very small, there are a lot of other characteristics of a priori that are very relevant to our conversations.
Like what?
That you cannot observe it, that you can't experience it, that it cannot, and therefore cannot be known because you can't experience it, what the implications of that are for its existence.
So something cannot be known. A priori knowledge is something that cannot be known.
So no, it's something that cannot be experienced directly. You cannot experience.
Like atoms.
No, I would argue, no. I can experience atoms. I can experience the force of, I can experience atoms indirectly through the force that the atoms are exerting through the molecules against my skin. That's not a priori, that's posteriori. And even beyond that, posteriori is, a priori is really, it had to do with like knowledge and theories of knowledge, and therefore epistemology, but
yes.
Nonetheless, the a priori knowledge has certain characteristics, and posteriori knowledge have certain characteristics that are very relevant to a solipsist position or an empiricist position, which is usually the opposite.
Knowledge again, and knowledge is a very problematic word.
It's how we know. What I mean in this way is, the study of knowledge would be how we know what we know.
You're using the word know. That's a problematic word.
I think you're reaching for straws because your argument's breaking down. So when you could say, so let's say I define know. Well, what do you mean by that, or what do you mean by this? Let me ask you, just define no for me. Then let's take it. I'll take it that way. You define no for me.
I can't do it. It's too ambiguous. I've thought about it.
So does that mean nobody knows anything?
It is a term that is used in various ways. It has some usefulness. That we have words that are useful, but somebody can say, well, I know such and such is right, and another person can say, well, but it's not. Well, if it turns out it's not, what did knowing it mean?
Okay, how about if I use the word experienced instead of no? So let's use the word experience.
Well, it depends on how.
Is that better?
Used. I don't know. Depends on how it's being used.
So, like, this is a limitation, I think, of the line of argument that, argument's the wrong word, but the line of thinking that you're proposing here. So if you take,
can you tell me what it is? The line of argument. What is my argument?
It seems like the line of argument is the word know or knowledge can have multiple meanings. Therefore, like you just said, we can't know for sure what it is. So it would seem to me, therefore, that...
See, there was a problem there. Can I interrupt?
Please.
When you say, therefore, we can't know what it is, that makes the assumption that knowledge is a particular thing, and that our definitions are our attempts to spell out what it is. But on the other hand, that's not what happens. We have symbols, we have words that are used to convey a certain kind of meaning, and it's different in different situations, and it's essentially arbitrary. It's not. We talked about definitions in a previous discussion. A definition is not a belief. Now we can have a belief. We can have a belief. Yeah, here we go.
I don't.
A definition.
Help me to get. What does this have to do with us agreeing on a word, on a definition of knowledge, or the word no, so we can have a conversation about this?
Well, I think that's not exactly where we were in the conversation. So now I think things have gotten kind of spattered.
I think what happens is that, this is my experience anyway, and I could absolutely be wrong, but I think a lot of the times what happens is I experience that when there is, it seems like that when there's an argument that there's not a strong counter for, the argument is always brought up about the definition of words to almost what I would argue is an inappropriate extreme. Like to say, well, what do you mean by knowledge? Okay, fair question. But then it's, well, what do you mean by know? Well, then what do you mean by experience? Well, I could say that's an infinite argument that is suddenly brought up that was never brought up earlier when those terms were used. And it seems like it's brought up when there's no good other refute to the point. So it's like when the point can't be refuted, there's a reversion towards trying to attack the position on the basis of this extreme questioning of specific words ad infinitum. And that just seems to be, I'm wondering if it's a dominant position. Like you're just trying to poke holes through the argument in this extreme way.
I feel like, as far as dominance is concerned, that I've been able to say very little because I'm not as fluent with words, of course, and you have been talking a lot. But saying, I understand that a lot of times people react negatively to the idea, well, define the term and so forth. And I think that's because our language allows us to say most anything. And the reason that I was saying it was not just to be difficult, but it had to do with you were trying to explain something that was not clear, and you were using a word that was not clear. Well, that particular word, I have for a long time recognized the problems with it.
Well, but this is, and I agree with that, and I'm fine with that. When you say, well, what do you mean by knowledge? And what do you mean by know? But then it was, what do you mean by experience? And I would gather that if I continue to define experience, it'd be, well, what do you mean by that? At a certain point, I mean, this is almost solipsist in nature. At a certain point, we have to make an analogy between what I think the word is and what you think the word means.
Oh,
what do I think it means and what do you think it means?
I understand that, like you could say, it's an infinite regress and so on.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I recognize easily that problem that define a word, you're going to have to use other words. Well, then you define those words and so forth. But that doesn't mean that there's no problem at all associated with the way that we use our words sometimes.
Right.
And I think that it is very problematic, the use of the word no when
Okay.
we're talking. If you were to ask me, do you know how to get to Harris Teeter? I would say, yeah, and there would be no problem because that's the way we're talking.
All right. So then let me go. Okay.
When we're talking about a priori knowledge, then it becomes a relevant issue as to what we mean by knowledge.
Okay. So then let me go. Then if that's the case, then I can go one level deeper. So I went from. I got it.
Wait. Let me.
Well, I'm ready to define experience better. I've accepted your argument, and I will define it one level more specifically if you'd like.
Well, I was going to say something different. I do feel a little bit like there's nothing much I can say because I don't get a chance really to.
I'm rushing. I'm sorry. I'm rushing because I'm so late. Go ahead.
There's so much in what you're saying along the way that I have some difficulty with. That
just go like this. Whenever you're having a difficulty with please, just go like this and I'll stop.
Well, I'll try.
And the reason why I always do this, whenever it gets close to the time where I have to stop, I start rushing because I want to keep talking.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm sorry, I do that every time we have a discussion. I apologize. I'm already a half hour late, but please could do this. That's from what I remember. That is our universal sign that, wait a minute, what you're saying, I'm not following or I don't agree with. But if I could just go back to the a priori and posteriori in terms of knowledge. So I said, what do you mean by knowledge? And I said, well, it's that which is known. And you said, well, what is known? And I said, well, it's that which experienced. And you said, well, what is experienced? So let me go one level lower.
Well,
and
okay, what is experienced? Okay. So if you experience a mirage, then you know it. See, there's a problem there. If you experience an hallucination, you know it.
Well, I'm gonna go one level deeper.
Okay.
And define experience.
Okay.
I'll attempt to. And by the way, what you just described is how the word known is being used in the definition. So whether a hallucination can be known, and anyway, let me go one. So by experience, I mean the thoughts, feelings, motivational states. It's by experienced means how your subjective experience changes in relationship to an object. So there's an object. I gain.
Follow that.
It's how your subjective experience changes based on an influence of something outside. You experience to be outside your subjective experience.
So you again, what were you defining? Experience?
Well, I'm defining experience.
So you're contrasting it, contrasting it with the cause of that experience.
Well, I don't know. It's interesting. Uh, yeah, I guess I would accept that. Let's just say it's the cause, and I wouldn't say contrasting it with the cause. I would say triggered by the cause.
Triggered, not caused.
Well, oh, yeah, okay, caused. Okay, let's go with that. Caused by something. So the way your subjective experience changes as a result of some cause, that's an experience. That happens within your mind, if that happens within your thoughts, within your feelings, within your motivational states. It's how your subjective experience changes. I would characterize that to be an experience. Is that fair? Is that detailed enough?
Well, it sounds a little bit strange to me. I think I see what you're saying. If there was no change, then you wouldn't have anything to be talking about, I guess, or something like that.
Well, the experience is one of the integral aspects of an experience is change. Something changes. Your thoughts change, your feelings change, your sensations change.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
yeah, I see what you mean.
Okay, so going back to a priori and that whole idea of its knowledge, and it's something that cannot be known. What that means is that it's something that can't be experienced, which means that it's something that cannot change my subjective experience, because it actually is, consciousness is my subjective experience. It cannot influence it. It is that.
By definition.
I don't think so. It's not by, well, at least that's my position. It's not by definition. Well, let me just say it this way. It is the way I experience myself. I have thoughts, I have sensations, I have motivational states. The I cannot be experienced. The I is therefore a priori. I can't say, and I don't think this is even an artifiction.
There's a question as to whether it exists or not, the I.
That can never be shown to exist. I think something that's a priori, as you mentioned, by definition, you cannot show and prove, and in that kind of deductive way, that it exists. It is in the subjective model, not the objective model.
It can be assumed.
Right, and that's
what I am saying is the meaning of a priori. It's something that we will agree to assume. And then we may come along at a later time and say, well, we have considered this to be a priori, but now, upon reviewing it, I think we need to clarify things a little more, because I don't think we should just be taking this for granted.
But see, that's why simply defining something that's a priori as something that which is assumed is inappropriate, because it's a limited definition and it implies the possibility of something that you just described, that we could just simply not assume it anymore. Assumption is part of the definition I would accept of a priori, but it's not the entire definition.
Well, maybe we can explore that some more. And also, I am struck by a kind of a major sense of disagreement when I say that a definition is not a belief.
Yes. Well, as a matter of fact, I recall that's how this whole conversation about solipsism started. This is going back like 3-4 months, where we were talking about, in this exact spot I'm sitting now, we were talking about definitions. And you said, definitions are not a belief. And I said, no, they are absolutely a belief. And that got us in this whole conversation about solipsism, empiricism, and yeah, and I could provide some pretty strong arguments that everything that is not a priori is a belief. So maybe let's talk about that next time.
Okay.
I'm already half hour late. You know, I will try to think of other words to use besides a priori and posteriori. I just don't know of any off the top of my head.
Well, we can use those terms, but we need to understand what we mean by them. And by we, I mean, we both have to have the same understanding of what the words mean. You could be using them with one set of meanings, and I could be using them with another set of meanings.
Right.
And then we would notice that we were in some kind of disagreement and not be able to understand why.
Well, right. I hear that. I agree. And I promise next time when it starts to get close, I will not start rushing. I will not begin to rush you and start going fast and, you know, hurry up. It's just because I enjoy our conversation so much. I want to make sure we get to everything, and I get a little excited. So
no,
that won't happen next time. I promise.
Well,
I'll really try.
It's a normal phenomenon. So
yeah.
So we just continue to work at trying to figure out how we can come to agreement, and maybe sometime later this year or next year or in a decade or something, we will be in perfect agreement.
I agree. Hopefully. We'll see what happens. Maybe. All right, my friend. I got to run.
Okay. Well, take care.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Now we all can see humanity, how much better we can